Okay, so now let's look at part 2 of Filtrate and the formation of Filtrate. And it looks like we're going to have a part 3 of this video as well. Now, the Filtrate, what we're talking about here is this is the fluid and the solutes coming out of the glomerular capillaries and enters into the glomerular capsule. Now, in a healthy adult, that volume equals 180 liters per day. Now, if you think of 180 liters, go to the grocery store and get a 2-liter jug of pop or soda, and it would be 90 of those. That would equal 180 liters per day. Well, you don't produce that much urine, all right? So all of that, not all of it, the vast majority of it has to then be reabsorbed into the body. And what regulates the production of the filtrate in the first place? The 180 liters, the glomerular filtrate. And that's going to be on 3 variables. The first variable is the glomerular hydrostatic pressure. Now, we've talked about movement of substances based on pressure gradients. Everything from early on when we talked diffusion, movement of concentration gradients. We talked about it when we are doing an action potential, movement of sodium and potassium in and out of the cell membrane. We talk about this in the cardiovascular system with fluid moving out of the capillaries and into the interstitial fluid, and also the respiratory system with the partial pressures of gases. So this is the movement of something based on pressure differences. This one most closely correlates with the scenario we did with the fluids within the capillaries of your blood vessels. So when we were back in the cardiovascular system. So your first variable is going to be glomerular hydrostatic pressure, which is abbreviated hydrostatic pressure with a small g down here, okay? Now, that is measured at about 60 millimeters of mercury, okay? Now, this pressure is greater than your blood pressure. Now, this would be the blood pressure within the glomerular capillaries, but this is different from the blood pressure of your systemic system, okay? This runs about 60, whereas the other pressures, if you were to go back into the cardiovascular chapter, was 20 or 30, if I'm not mistaken, and it's much greater. And this is your primary factor in determining how much filtrate is formed, and it's going to be this pressure. Now, this pressure is determined based on the afferent and efferent arterioles. Now, remember, the afferent arteriole was a much larger vessel than the efferent. Well, if you put more blood into the glomerular capillaries than you let out, it builds up pressures in the glomerular capillaries. That pressure is what we're talking about. And then that pressure is forcing fluid and solutes out of the capillaries and into the glomerular capsule. Okay, so that's going to be your key issue. Now, what opposes this? Opposes this one. So this is your first one. The second one is your blood colloid osmotic pressure. And this is abbreviated osmotic pressure of the glomerulus, OM or OPG. And this is determined or relevant for the plasma proteins. So this is coming from the plasma proteins within the blood. So albumin would be a big factor in here. So blood plasma proteins. And the osmotic pressure, the value that is 32 millimeters of mercury. Okay, so this is what we're looking at. So we have 60 pushing out. So far we have 30 resisting or opposing that. So if 60 goes out, 32 comes back in, now we're, what, 28 out? Okay, but this is not the only thing that we're looking at. The third one is going to be capsular hydrostatic pressure. And that's just abbreviated the hydrostatic pressure with a C, capsule. And this is measured at 18 millimeters of mercury. Okay. Now the capsular pressure comes from the other fluid that already is in the capsule. Okay. So we've had filtrate coming out. That filtrate builds up prior to going into the proximal convoluted tubule. So you've got that resistance it's pushing against. So that capsular pressure is resisting or opposing the hydrostatic pressure from the glomerulus. So the basic equation that we're looking at is your hydrostatic pressure of your glomerulus, that's an H, believe it or not. I don't want to parentheses on this one. Minus your osmotic pressure of the glomerulus, that's the plasma proteins, plus the hydrostatic pressure of the capsule. This equals net filtration pressure. NFP is net filtration pressure. So using the numbers we already had, this was 60 minus 32 plus 18, which is 50. So 60 minus 50 equals 10 millimeters of mercury out. Okay, so we are generating more fluid going into the glomerular capsule than what's pulling it back in. Okay, now NFP, net filtration pressure, let me go back up on this one. So net filtration pressure is a direct correlation or a significant correlation with what another measure we're going to look at, which is glomerular filtration rate. Now, net filtration pressure, this is going to be based on a volume per minute type of thing. And what net filtration pressure is associated with, let me scroll here. So if you have, okay, let's go back and how you can affect the rate. So if we're looking at what affects that net filtration pressure, we said that it was your primary function was your hydrostatic pressure of your glomerulus. So if we have hydrostatic pressure of your glomerulus, if this was to increase, this causes an increase in net filtration pressure, okay? If you have a net increase in your net filtration pressure, what does that result in? So if you have an increase, in net filtration pressure, this will directly affect their glomerular filtration rate. So GLO, glomerular filtration rate. It's getting too late. I'm making spelling errors more often, okay? So that stands for glomerular filtration rate. So how much filtrate is coming through that? So if you increase your net filtration pressure, you're going to increase how much filtrate is coming out of the glomerulus, or your glomerular filtration rate. The other thing that's going to be doing this is that increases the amount of filtrate that's formed. So if you increase the pressure, that's going to cause more filtrate to be formed. If you cause more filtrate to be formed, that means that the fluid that goes into the tubules, remember proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, the more filtrate you have coming out of the glomerulus, the faster that filtrate moves through the tubes. Can you visualize that? If I have more water coming this way, that's going to be pushing all the other stuff through as well. It's not stagnant, in other words. So if you have more fluid flowing through the tubule system, then you are going to create more urine. And because you're moving the fluid through the tubules faster, you are preventing substances from reabsorbing into your body, okay? So, in other words, you're not giving it enough time to reabsorb. So if we have a lot of a certain ion and we're pushing it through at a high rate of speed, well, it has to come into contact with the wall for a period of time for it to be absorbed. But if we're moving it by, it's not giving it enough time. So if you have a higher osmotic pressure, hydrostatic pressure of the glomerulus, that increases your net filtration pressure, which increases glomerular filtration rate, which increases the amount of filtrate formed, which increases the volume of the tubular fluid and the speed that it transmits or transitions through the tubules, which means more urine, and more urine with more solutes in the urine. Okay. Now, if we decrease net filtration pressure, that basically means we're going to have less filtrate, and the fluid that gets into the tubular system, that quantity of fluid, that's moving slower. So if it's moving slower, we reabsorb more nutrients and more stuff from the tubular fluid, making it more concentrated. So that's what we've done on this one. Part 3 of the video, we're going to look at what variables, is it variables that I want? What variables influence the glomerular filtration rate? So that's going to be next. And that'll probably be tomorrow because I'm getting tired right now.